Welcome back for our next panel, Building the Modern Athlete, Performance Analytics. We're excited to have 5 great panelists and our moderator. So from left to right, we have Angela Ruggiero with the International Olympic Committee and Team USA. We have Kevin Pritchard with the Indiana Pacers, Mike McCann with Sports Illustrated and Vermont Law, John Brenkus with Sports Science and Base Productions, Mark Verstegen with Athletes Performance, and our moderator, Peter Keating. If you need to ask questions, please tweet them to hashtag SSAC, or as you can see on the screen, you can text ASK2 to 37048. With that, I'll turn it over to Peter.
Thank you, and thank you all for coming and for participating, and thanks to our panel for taking part in this. I'll start by saying last year when we did this, I allowed things to get off track way too much because I was shocked by how much our participants then said that, well, I should say how little our participants said that pro teams were doing to optimize athlete performance. If you go to a spring training game this year, you'll see baseball players basically running and walking and throwing, basically the same way they did 80 years ago. And it's the same in a lot of sports. And we heard a lot last year about how there's not that much research by major league teams across sports into injury prevention. There's little centralization of injury data. Teams don't seem to monitor the medical procedures that players go under, except to make sure they're legal. And it doesn't even seem like that many teams use medical or health-related information in negotiating contracts or signing players. I don't want to spend a lot of time on that this year because I just want to ask if anyone has counterexamples that have come up in the past year. Is there anybody who is doing a great job at the team level of optimizing player performance? And Kevin, maybe we can start with you because you are.
Oh, great, me first.
Because you're you're a team insider.
Okay, yeah, you know, well, first of all, it's great to be here. I feel a little compelled to give great information today because Drew Carey is next door. And if that doesn't show you the apocalypse is upon us, I mean, Drew Carey at a sports analytics conference? Come on, guys.
We got a well-packed room.
Or is he in here? He's not in here, is he? I think we're going head-to-head with Drew Carey. You know, I think the teams, I'm thinking back when I played in the NBA. You know, it was 20 years ago, let's say early 90s. I would say that it was still all about just the player and healing after you got hurt, right? And you got hurt, you go see the trainer, you know, rub a little salt, a little dirt into it, and you know, see if you can go back out. But with modern technology, it's amazing how we're learning about the body, first of all. And it's grown so much that even to the fact that we're getting into the body mechanics. And that's what I find very fascinating, that we're learning how players run, jump, do everything. And to me, the preventive stuff is where the next generation, I know a lot of people on this will be able to talk about it in more detail, but I disagree. So 20 years ago, not much was put into it. I think today it's a new generation, it's a new athlete, and the athletes themselves actually want to get as much information as they possibly can. And what we've noticed in the NBA is you have the athlete, you have the agent, and then you have the team. And you got to come together and try to figure out what's the best solution for repairing, and as a general manager or assistant general manager or management in the NBA, it's almost a prerequisite. I mean, how many people want to be a general manager in management here? And raise your hand. So there's quite a few. But it's almost like you have to know the athlete's body. You know, I went into every surgery during my tenure in Portland, and you know, you just got to get up with it. And I think the future is really bright, and it's amazing. 20 years ago, not much. Today, we're just at the brink, and it's an exciting world.
Okay, so understanding that information is now just coming out. Like I bet a lot of people here would be able to give your quarterbacks net yards per passing attempt, which is a little bit of an esoteric stat, but it's something people track now, or like batting average and balls in play. But I don't think people know your favorite players, the number of days or dollars he lost to the disabled list as easily. So John, let me ask you, who is doing the cutting edge work in present company may be accepted in improving performance? Is it academies? Is it athlete-driven? Is it independent researchers? Who's making the biggest gains right now in improving performance?
I think that in terms of evaluating who's doing the best job, I think people like Mark, he's really built an amazing business and being very specialized in taking athletes and really optimizing their performance. And I think that the private sector almost always does a better job than the public sector. And I think that by and large, the leagues are sort of the public sector of the athlete workforce, and then you have the private sector. And a lot of athletes, find their trainer, they find, their gym, their routine that works for them. And I think that in answering your first question about have there been strides that have been made, I think that the new NFL agreement this past year did make a stride forward in a couple ways. I think that, first of all, the reducing the amount of contact in practice, as we spoke last year, I thought that it was an incredibly antiquated process to have so many days of contact in practice, and 70% of all injuries in the NFL coming during practice. It was just insane that they were running guys through the mill like that. I think that was a big step forward. And also just the sort of the concussion rules, while not perfect, are certainly making an attempt. So I think that that's a step forward. But I think that the different leagues are providing sort of a skeleton that's being filled in by the private sector, with people like Mark.
Does anyone see specific fields or injuries where research or development, and it could be diagnosis or prevention or treatment, is right now happening really fast? Like if we look back on this 3 or 5 years from now, is there a specific kind of injury or problem where progress is being made like as we speak? You want to talk to that?
Yeah, I think if we were to look at that right now, as in a point of a historical perspective, is going to be above the neck, right? It's everything in around traumatic brain injury, what's happening there. Yeah, this will be the light. As we were just talking before this kicked off, is it's been a body of research, right? From military all the way through to sport. From all combative sports into non-combative sports when they make contact with ice or with, the turf, whatever else. But when we look at that, I think right now it's going to be kind of this beachhead, this mark where we've actually illuminated the space. Concussions are a real issue. And what John's saying is right, when we think concussions, please don't think it's that one hit, right? It's not on the 49ers on the goal line. It's not just the one hit. To John's point, the biggest win in this last CBA in the NFL was by us kind of getting a land grab around player safety and welfare. And in talks with Dee, when you run the numbers, that's saving an athlete between off season, in season, like pre-camp, and then going through camp. You add that up based on the data, even when they're just in little shells in their helmet, and the number of impacts that they have, the number of G's that they have, and the number of hits. It saves an athlete 10 to 15,000 hits per year. That's 60 to 100,000 hits that we're saving that particular athlete, one for career longevity, but also more importantly, once they retire, of how they're going to function post. But then second, we have to look at creating these conducive cultures in the space that what are we doing now about the preventative, not just diagnosis, but what are we doing to create the conducive culture to make sure we're, one, changing the ground rules, and then two, we have the right support systems in place to protect the athletes.
Angela, is that true where you work? Has brain injury reached is it the frontier around athletes where you are now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's, as we all mentioned, it's at the forefront of every athlete right now. Excuse me, I play on just retired, but played on the Olympic team for 4 years, 4 times, and some of my teammates are now just realizing what they need to do to prevent injuries, but more importantly, they're being diagnosed. I think that's the biggest thing. I remember times getting hit and not going to the doctor or not even knowing that I needed to go to the doctor. So I think that's the biggest thing, is the awareness of the athlete now. And with that awareness comes the need for doctors and other health professionals to have the capabilities to properly diagnose these athletes. Because if I'm an athlete, I'm trusting in those professionals to say, am I cleared or not? And if they clear you too soon and you go out and get injured again, that could really ruin your career. So absolutely, from an athlete's perspective, it's at the forefront of injury prevention we're talking about. Is there a different helmet I can wear? Are there certain drills I should avoid? If I get hit, when should I go back into the game, or how many days should I take off?
Well, that goes to the question of what athletes themselves are aware of and asking. And I think as athletes get better educated and make more money, a lot of the drive to improve performance is a lot of the increase is actually coming from the athlete side. As more athletes have more time and interest and money to spend on this, athletes are interested in this. So let's talk about a few of the aspects of building a better athlete and what athletes are doing. A lot of news was generated over the past year about therapeutic and surgical techniques, some of which happened outside this country. You had A-Rod, you have Kobe, you have Bartolo Colon. Mike, I wanted to ask you, are the most advanced therapies now taking place outside the U.S.? Is that where the cutting edge research and also where the law allows this stuff to happen? I mean, I know the FDA does not sanction what we might call extreme orthopedics, right? Based the way that the food and drug laws are written. So is the interesting stuff happening overseas?
I think in part our regulatory bodies are much more scrutinizing than those in other countries, and that's, some researchers here would say that that's prevented them from being as aggressive as they would like to be, and in turn, that's incentivized players to go abroad for certain treatments. But I think both the leagues and the players' associations are going to have to grapple with these alternative treatments that they're performance enhancers, but they're also health enhancers. I mean, just take LASIK surgery, right? Something that can be done in the United States, certainly. You know, if you're born with 20/16 vision and over time deteriorate to 20/20, and then a team suggests that you have laser surgery to go from 20/20 to 20/12, is that cheating? Is that a performance enhancer? You're improving your eyesight, but you're now going to vision better than you've ever had, better than you were designed to have, if you will. How about stem cell relocation, like Bartolo Colon did? These are hard issues because when we talk about steroids, we think of somebody injecting themselves with a needle or being injected. We think of something nefarious. With LASIK surgery, you think of a doctor. It doesn't sound that bad, but on another level, it's making you better than you actually are. And I think leagues and players' associations, through collective bargaining and other devices, will have to grapple with that.
Should leagues and teams care, Kevin? Would you want a comprehensive medical history? Do you want like health dossiers on your players?
Wow, that's a tough question. I would say yes and no. Yes, because the more information we have, the better, I guess, decisions we can make. But no, because ultimately this is about a human being, not just necessarily the player either. So, tough question.
I remember when the Bulls wanted Eddie Curry to take a DNA test.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
And he said no. He said, I don't want to, I'll go through 12 other types of tests. But there's something invasive about a DNA test, because if you are able to obtain the DNA, you can see a lot about a person. Things that a basketball team would like to know but shouldn't know. So should we allow DNA tests? Should that even be subject to collective bargaining, or should it be off the table at the start?
Because there are some civil rights you can't bargain
Sure.
away in collective bargains, right? The flip side of that is that when I started researching this, I expected the teams and leagues to want this information, maybe not to want to share it, but I thought they'd want to collect it. But I thought the unions would also want the information to promote health of their players. But it seems in some sports that unions don't want to, I mean, they don't even want to know. If you have a 25-year-old left-hander who threw 180 innings last year, what are the odds that his arm's going to break down this year? It kind of seems the MLBPA doesn't want to know, because that means if you have a player in that situation, it might hurt his chances to get a contract. So seem like there are big institutional blocks to some research proceeding at that level?
I think that this question goes toward, really to me, it falls into two different camps. There's one, if you were to ask that question about a high school student, everyone is going to say, I want to know exactly how many games that kid has played. I want to know what he's put in his body. I want to know, because as a doctor and as a trainer, I want to be able to tell him.
Like a medical record.
Right, like a medical record. And if you apply it to a professional athlete, there's well, look, we don't want it, it's an invasion of privacy, we don't let them know. And I think that the answer, there needs to be a common sense answer, that when we're discussing about building the better athlete, nothing helps you more than being educated. And I think the #1 problem in the industry is that, honestly, doctors aren't as educated as you think they are. I think people have some crazy theories. People mistreat people all the time. And using a very real life example that's not on the professional level, but on the youth level, I had a really good friend of mine, 15-year-old kid, suffered a concussion, went to a doctor. The doctor said, you know what, take a couple days off. When the cobwebs clear from your head, get back on the ice and you're fine. And that's insanity. That's crazy. But there are tons of doctors, and there are a lot of people that just simply aren't as educated as you think they are. And that's what we really need to address, is that the medical people.
Concussions are a really tough example because there are plenty of examples where families try to do the right thing. They go to their pediatrician, they get cleared, they rest the amount of time they're told to rest, but then they're not ready because concussions don't show up on CAT scans or MRIs because they don't involve brain bleeding, and then they go back in and get much worse injuries. So that's a really tough one.
It's a tough one.
Well, part of the problem, the difficulty of reaching a common sense answer is that we have health protocols as part of collective bargaining. So in the same discussions as to how much minimum salary should be and whether or not players should get certain licensing rights, we also bargain things like concussions and real issues that are much more about health than they are about dollars and cents. And maybe part of the problem is that we have this collective bargaining process, which is useful in so many ways, and I'm not suggesting that collective bargaining is bad, but it also requires a universal bargaining session that means that things like concussions get traded off for higher minimum salaries. And I don't know if that process is healthy for anyone, and it makes it difficult, like John noted, to get the common sense solution.
Well, let's make it even harder then, because while we're worried about education and doctors on one level, on the frontiers of science, is moving towards genetic testing. Talking about concussions are one example. ACL injuries are another, where it's turning out there are genetic predispositions to injuries. What do you guys think about athletes getting genetic tests to see if they're predisposed to certain kind of sports injuries?
Boy, I've got two different opinions in that. And it really stems from, there's so much money involved in professional sports, hundreds of millions of dollars. And from a manager's perspective, I want the knowledge, right? Because I'm about to sign a player to many, many years and lots of money. But as being a former athlete, I'm not sure I want that information shared either, because it could help me, but it also could hurt me. And I guess the mysterious part of it is that if you don't know and management doesn't know, maybe you get the longer contract, maybe you get a bigger contract. Maybe
Before you even get to sharing, would you want to know personally about your own genetic history or
Absolutely, but I would only want me to know, me and my doctor.
Yeah, but on the International Olympic Committee, I'm on a commission called the Entourage Commission, and it deals specifically with all the people that surround the athlete, the coaches, the trainers, the doctors, the agent, the sponsor, literally everyone. And trying to come up with the technology where the athlete could share the information to the people they want to share it to. I think that's the biggest thing. As an athlete, absolutely. I trained at Athletes Performance before Vancouver Olympics, and I'm like, give me everything. I want to learn where I need to work on, and I want to learn the areas that I can improve. Versus, my first Olympics where I had none of that data. So absolutely, the athletes, I think, want it, but the biggest issue is the privacy issue. Who do you want to share it with? On the Entourage Commission, we're trying to figure out how do we disperse this information? Because ultimately, if it gets into the hands of my doctor more efficiently, of my trainer, of my coach, and they have my best interests, maybe we're not talking about a pro athlete here, maybe this is an Olympic athlete, then that's going to help me if everyone's on the same page. So how do we move that data around to the people that you want it to leave it with?
I think she hit it on the head. It's the difference between an Olympic and a contractual athlete, right? Olympic, you want to get all the information. Contractual, yeah, you probably want all the information, but what you don't want to do is have it be shared.
Well, I think, first of all, I want to make clear that you said you're on, what was the name of the committee, Olympic committee?
Entourage.
Entourage. So like officially, some of us in the space were in the
entourage.
entourage? Yeah, is that right? Okay, I just want to make sure we're clear there. So, but the other thing is you have to look at is, let's just say that, I do get my genetics tested. The power like below the neck, right, ACL predisposition, versus the thought that I'm putting in as Peter. Look at these results. You have a big predisposition for an ACL injury. Good luck. So unless, evaluation's great, more information's great, but if you don't have ways to then take that information and then build it into something that I can act on, sometimes we're better not to know. So I think it's with any time that we look at evaluation, we have to say, okay, if I know that information, what am I going to do about it? And if is it going to change the protocol in which I go about it? Brain, we can have the same discussion.
Have you ever had a case where you saw a medical, or you conducted an evaluation of an athlete where you weren't sure you wanted to share all that information because it might be so overloading?
To the athlete, to the agent, to the team?
To anyone.
Well,
there's
those
different
are all
categories,
different categories,
but
right?
I meant to the athlete.
So with the athlete, what we always have to understand and what we try to do is okay, so we talk about athletes. Athletes are not machines. We, as a brand philosophy, is we are dealing with the person who lives inside that body, right? The person first. And in some cases, that person is a provider, and sometimes that provider ultimately provides by making a living playing. So as we look at that, we always deal with the person. Each person has a different behavioral type. If you do very simple behavioral screens, you're going to say, hey, some people are high information people. They need all the data. They need to process it, and then we need to help be there with them. Other people, bedside manner is, I need to give them just a few nuggets, and that's based on their driving that type of communication. So yes, we've had the data, and in some of those cases, you communicate it, but we also have to communicate it with, here's the actionable plan and the outcomes that we have, the paths that we have to take, and then let them help guide that process.
I think that the answer to like genetic testing or DNA and finding out as much as you can, I think that to me there's a very clear answer that I don't know what a general manager would actually, how they could make a decision based on that information that's an educated decision, because it's such a limited data set. If you were to say, well, someone's predisposed to having an ACL injury, well, maybe that person has worked really hard to compensate it as a better structure than someone who's not. You have no idea what that actually means. So it seems like it's an irrelevant thing for a general manager. And if we as a society say, well, we're going to test the DNA of an athlete and see if that, there's going to be no correlation to it.
And yet we're really driven by like as a society, I think, driven by a wish for quick technological answers. Partly because we've had so many. I mean, we've invented so many things that, that have solved so many problems. We're always looking for magic bullets. And so the technology gets ahead of our capacity to use it. There was a story in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about how parents are now having their kids genetically tested and putting them into sports that allegedly match their genetic skills, which is, I mean, I'd like to hear what you guys think about that, but I think I have a feel for it. I mean, does that make any sense at all?
I think it's insanity. I think it's just dumb. It's like, if a kid likes something, they're going to be good at it. They may not be genetically predisposed to it, but they might be fantastic at bowling, as opposed to basketball. They just have to like it. So you just deal with that, first and foremost. And, on an individual, I think that all of the science, and mind you, we do sports science, and we test athletes, up one side and down the other, and we take the analysis, and everybody asks me, like, what's the secret? What's the secret? What's the secret? What's the magic metric? Like, there isn't a magic metric. There's so many intangibles that go beyond the science that go to the individual person. I think that as Mark was saying, earlier, the above-the-shoulder athlete is way more important than the below-the-shoulder, because that's your discipline, your focus, your ability to achieve. What are your training patterns? It's the mental component is, I think, very undervalued, and it's not something you can put a number on.
Well, I think that's probably the future of analytics in our space. We have lots of numbers on athletes below the neck, and literally, if you want to tune an athlete, we'll tune an athlete as precisely as you can give us the information. Tell us the sport, tell us who the head coach is, let us spend time with the head coach, let them tell us his philosophy. From that, let's talk about the positions on the team, drill down on the positions, create player profiles, analysis, build back, tune, and they'll have the right people.
Well, before we talk more, I want to talk more about the mental and cognitive aspects of this. But before we do that, I want to talk, before we leave the body, I want to talk about anabolics. Just because people pay so much attention to baseball, I think there's an impression that sports are kind of moving to some kind of post-steroid era. And first of all, I want to ask you guys if that's true. If the athletes you each deal with come to you or around you are less interested in anabolics and steroids. And number two, if there are more popular alternatives these days in the last few years than what seemed to be a craze of just bulking up for the sake of bulking up. Is there more interest in lower body training? Is there more interest in endurance versus power? Anything like that? So, Angela, I'll start with you.
Sure. I guess I sit on the World Anti-Doping Agency Foundation Board, and I've been speaking with a lot of athletes just in terms of their perspective. Now this is, again, coming from the Olympic side, but we had the #1 recommendation that came out of the Athletes Forum in Colorado Springs this past year, the International Olympic Committee Athletes Forum, was for more stern punishments for athletes using prohibited substances. So clearly from the athlete's perspective, they see that it's going on and they want a clean, they want a level playing field. And they're saying, we don't think that the governing bodies are being strict enough with the athletes that are cheating. So it's still out there, unfortunately. I don't think it'll ever go away. It's just a matter of, how quickly can the bodies that are trying to track those athletes stay up to speed with the athletes that are actually cheating. And that is such a hard line right now, trying to keep up. So is it there? Yes, it's there, unfortunately. I don't think there's a post-steroid era. I don't think there ever will be. That's the nature of sport. You want to win. But at the same time, if the methods can get up to speed with the athletes that are cheating, then I think you can bring that percentage lower.
Kevin, do you want to use this chance to break some news about the prevalence of steroid use in the NBA?
I like my job too much for that. I think what's interesting is we're talking about steroids, but what will we be talking about in 5 or 10 years? It's not even close to what they're going to go with it. And again, I keep coming back to this. There's so much money involved. And, when kids can make generational money, that they don't have to work after that, their kids, that, there's always going to be people wanting to get the edge, whether it's today, tomorrow, or 10 years.
And then the question is, why is a substance prohibited, right? If it's illegal, fine. What about non-illegal substances, and why do we pick and choose certain ones? I mean, let's say tomorrow we had a steroid that we absolutely were 100% sure has no adverse health effects. It only makes you bigger if you work out. Why would we prohibit that? Is that cheating? It's hard to know. Like Kevin said, 5 to 10 years from now, there probably will be substances, right, that the Olympic Committee will have to look at that are totally healthy, or more or less totally healthy. But we don't like them because we think they're cheating. But then it's like, well, why don't we prohibit certain surgeries or LASIK? It's this world of categories, and we don't know where to put certain things and why we're putting things in certain categories.
Well, talk a little bit about that. You're the guy who's the expert here in the field. Why did steroids, in particular, seem to create that kind of outrage? When Victor Conti invented the cream and the clear, the response to it was so moralistic, and so indignant. And many of you guys may disagree with this, but I thought the kind of untold story of Victor Conti was how he was kind of a great American carnival barker. He figured out a way to beat the system because he figured out how to invent chemicals that weren't outlawed yet. And then kind of like a driver who sped through a town where there were no speed limit signs, they put up the speed limit signs and convicted him for driving too fast. Now, I know there was a lot of other technical stuff that he did wrong, and I know he helped athletes he helped athletes cheat and all that kind of stuff. But it does seem that maybe it's because all of a sudden these guys were getting physically big and breaking cherished home run records. Why do we get so upset about steroids, given what you just said?
Well, I think part of it is Peter, what you said, that there's this correlation between Victor Conti and the fact that the home run record was broken, in the sense that it wasn't broken in a legitimate way, and we associate it with this one guy. But you're right, on another level, he was sort of a trailblazer, if you will. No, not reference to the Trailblazers, but he was a trailblazer, right? He did things, he was ahead of the game, he was ahead of the testing. In some walks of life, and a lot of business students here, we would applaud him for being so creative and so able to skirt regulation and get around the rules that have limited others. But I think what it came down to is that he seemed like a nefarious guy. He didn't present particularly well. And also, some of the substances were illegal, so you could link it to a law being broken.
I think Mike brings up a great point on what is going to be legal, what's not going to be. I mean, even today, they have techniques where they take the plasma out of your body, they spin it around, and then they put it back in. Now, should that be illegal? Is that, it's your own body, but yet it helps you. It enhances
you choose to do it, right? It's your choice. It's not
enhances the athlete.
I think that just even in the discourse, I think that what's missing to me is just empathy for the athlete and just sympathy. And I honestly, I mean, in total sincerity, like we have a ridiculous double standard in our society for, there's everybody else in the world and then there are athletes. mean, when you're saying like, does spell check help the writer write the story? Grammar check. It's like, is that boosting their performance? And it is.
I've never enhanced my performance.
Right.
With spell check.
And our supermodels are certainly not real. I mean, we're looking at them and you're like, that's fake, that's fake, that's fake, that's real, that's performance enhancing. I mean, and then when you get to the athlete, what is the athlete supposed to do? And when you have, I think like the rules are really clear. These substances are on a list that you can't do. Fine. There are 1,000 that aren't on the list. And when it becomes very moralistic of like, should I do it, should I not do it? When there's so much money at stake, we're not talking about winning a bar bet. We're talking about making $10 million. It's like, would you do it? I mean, I'm a guy that's never done anything. And if you had that kind of money, it's not on a list of banned substances. It's gonna make me better. There are no known side effects for it. I feel so sorry for the athlete of where is the line? And when you say there is a clear line, there isn't. It's a big shade of gray.
Well, before we get to the ethics and the law, let me just ask you guys again, just so I'm clear. The people who are pushing the frontiers on this, I mean, for decades, guys would be literally going to libraries and looking up old German pharmaceutical patents and then tweaking a hydroxyl group to come up with a new steroid, right? And that was where it was at in terms of people at least claiming to boost performance rapidly. Is that still going on where you guys are involved with athletes? Are athletes coming to you saying that that's what they're looking to do, is bulk up like guys wanted to do in the 90s? Or has that died down and people are looking at different kinds of enhancement or just improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think the shortcut, the cost for the shortcut, and what it means to their career and their brand, and we have to realize that each one of these athletes now view themselves as a brand. It'd be no different than what Toyota just went through or somebody else where there was not an ethical play. It means a lot to them. They know the downside's great. But what we have to ask ourselves and what the athletes have to look at, there is far more performance. And I think, let's look at why we use performance-enhancing drugs. They call them performance-enhancing drugs. So part of it is, I will tell you that there is more performance left inside 90% of the athletes that we see, from improving kinetic linking and how their body works and coordination and behavioral approaches, that 90% of how they organize their day runs in their subconscious.
And just tell everybody what kinetic linking is.
So, right, like my ability to transfer energy from one segment to the next. It's why, little guys and all of a sudden they still hit the ball with great power. This notion that a bigger muscle is a better muscle is absolutely irrelevant unless it is a combative sport, and it's still somewhat irrelevant in the equation, and we'll talk about that all day long. And the reason for that is because people aren't utilizing the majority of what their body can already do, yet we just think like it's given a 16-year-old kid the keys to a car and say, hey, let me also, put a couple turbochargers on there before you take your first drive. It's irresponsible. It's also why it breaks down. So let me hold this up for Peter. So that's the performance enhancing side. Like there's way more left in the normal, the natural human that we can get at through behavioral stuff, the nutrition, the movement, the recovery, all that. But let me fly up just to make it more relevant for people in the audience. How many people here get tired? Right? How many people here are overworked? Right? Class load, everything. Right? So you just keep going through this. Our athletes, professional leagues, NFL, Olympic teams, tournament play, baseball, 162 games. That isn't just playing on the field night after night and the demands of crashing and beating and throwing your arm and pitch counts and all the stats and the analytics we have. They fly 100,000 plus miles a year. They go to and from those types of things. Nutrition is limited where they go. It's not always able to do that. The basic criteria of being a human across mindset, nutrition, movement, recovery is an unbelievably tough equation. It's tough for executives. It's tough for everyone in this room. We take that layer on world-class performance night after night in unbelievably stressful environments, which after injury or any type of performance, the body has to recover. Performance-enhancing drugs' greatest benefit to performance is in allowing people to recover faster. And it's not just from the demands of the game, but from the demands of playing the game even outside the lines.
So let me ask you then, we're at an analytics conference, let's tie this to some numbers. How do you measure what athletes get, what kind of return on investment or what they get out of a program designed to help them along these lines? I don't think it's enough anymore, right, that athletes just feel better or that they seem healthier. Athletes are actually looking for, and I think you are too, and teams are too, for an actual improvement in specific performance tied to better conditioning and optimizing their routines. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, it's fair to say.
How do you measure it?
Well, I mean, so then we're going to get, and this is where this whole metrics and analytics get really interesting, right? So right now, in order to get metrics and analytics during team play, right, team systems all over the place, I can tell all these things. Here's a revolution. Adidas just launched a product. It's Nike has like the Nike Plus, right? Well, Adidas has a product that a kid can put in his football cleat. Sorry, I'm talking soccer cleat right now, right? It goes in football cleat. Tiny pod that big, puts it in there, leaves it for 7 months, Peter. Every day after practice, they go through, and as soon as the kid's done, they grab their iPhone or their little touch, and they go like that. Every stat for their entire practice, their entire game is in their hand. And I can say, hey, Coach Peter, look I had, 42 sprints, and I had all these things. So part of it is this is going to be a groundswell up in analytics, but it's also going to make us much more intelligent about the correlations between youth all the way through the most elite level practices of players getting data, forcing it up, and coaches being held more accountable. But that's where kind of the interesting part comes around the analytics. So if I were going to task you and say, I've been around the athlete space for a really long time, you can tell by the gray hair. I would say if you want to spend your time and effort, if you look at how an athlete, like the opportunity, the white space is an athlete outside the lines, and I'm going to take that from the conditioning. We can say VO2s and movement patterns. We can screen people biomechanically and tell you their predominance for injury and how we go clean that up software-wise and hardware-wise. But tell me this 18-year-old kid, what they do when they wake up in the morning to when they go to bed at night. This is the foundation on which you're basing all your analytics on. And there is more variability between these people, and Kevin will say the same, between someone who is extremely dialed in and has a system or these rituals. Again, all of us in this room, you don't know what you're doing 90% of the time. It runs in your subconscious. So when we have a player, we can say a certain career value of the player is here, but is that player on a downward trend or is that player on an upward trend? And you can give me the on-court or on-field numbers. I'll go back and go run analytics on the quality of what they do when they wake up, they do to hydrate, what they do to fuel, what their rituals are on the field or the training, all these different things that make up their daily habits. And I'll tell you how good that car is and how well that car has been taken care of. And that's a lot of times outside the team environment.
Angela, was there a moment in your career where you realized that your natural talent and the way you'd always practiced had taken you to a certain point, and beyond that point you were going to have to change how you maintained the car, as Mark said, and put in new and different types of behavior and then see how they work to change your performance?
Yeah, absolutely. Having the luxury of getting to compete at several games, each games I felt I learned a little more. More technology came out, more science, more strategy, and you do reach a point physically where, okay, you might have been tapped out, but it's exactly what Mark said. I got to train athletes' performance before Vancouver, and I did a nutritional analysis, food sensitivity test. I had no idea some of the things I was eating every day were actually adversely affecting me.
Well, like what? What were you eating every day? What were you eating that was bad for you?
Eggs,
wow.
Milk. I mean, things that are in your diet, and there's a reason you're sensitive to it, because you eat it all the time. So I was able to eliminate that from my diet, and it really just changed the way that I functioned as an athlete. And that's science. I was able to look at my heart rate data and train specifically for my heart rate based on the zones that were applicable to me, not my team. Hey, try to get to this number. No, what does Angela Ruggiero need to get at? And then taking that, when I joined my team in the fall, we actually wore a heart rate monitor all the way up and through the Olympics. And every day I stepped off the ice, I could look at how much workload I had, what my max heart rate was. I could see actually the decline, how quickly I was recovering, and compare that then to my teammates, which I think is one of the biggest points in team sport that's lost out. How do you take a team, in hockey's case, 20 individuals, and put them on the same field? My line mate wasn't at sometimes recovering as quickly as I was. So were we the best match? Okay, she had to go out there at the same time as me. Maybe we had to switch partners because of that. So learning to correlate data between athletes, I think, is just as important once you get to that stage as working with the individual athlete up and to. But absolutely, I learned more as my career progressed. And I did reach a point where I thought, all right, here, I know what I'm doing. And then I realized I really don't. There's so many more areas that I was able to tap into at that summer.
We have a bunch of questions from the audience, so let me start with a few of these. Kevin, I'll ask you this. What medical information would you look at with an athlete? This person has said, like Greg Oden, we don't necessarily have to
How did I know that was going to come up?
talk about his medical case, but for athlete X who has been known to be injury prone, what medical information would you look at that might factor into your decision to draft or sign him? What specific signs are you looking for?
Well, as a general manager, you get all kinds of information, right? And I can't talk about specific players. I know everybody wants to talk about it. But, you know, you get all information. So you have your scouting department, and you're trying to evaluate the talent. And then you have your doctors trying to evaluate the medical part, and psychologists looking at the whole person. I find that real interesting, the above the head. But I think what you try to do is get all the information and try to make your best decision. And
is there a specific metric? Like, do you care about the number of days somebody's been injured, or a type of injury to a particular part of a body? Like, what's a huge red flag for you?
Well, there are all kinds of injuries. I mean, lower extremity injuries in basketball, you know, they can be pretty tough. What's interesting is a lot of the decisions in the draft are the biggest decisions. That's your one chance at specialness, other than, you know, a little bit in free agency, but with some of the teams I've been, it hadn't been a city of draw. So you've got to make great picks in the draft. And, you know, one of the things that we had trouble was getting all the medical information. Yeah, every player that goes through the draft, or most players go through the draft, they go through a battery of testing. And then a lot of times that's made public to the whole league. And then you bring players up to your campus, your area, and you try to get more. With certain players, we were actually able to get MRIs of knees and hips and ankles, and they came out pristine, yet there was a player that had predisposition to a lot of injuries. And so you're trying to get as much information to make the best, but I don't think I think people in the panel would say, you still can't predict the future. That's the hardest.
But you do some of that research yourself. You're not just asking for somebody's medical records from when they were kids. You actually do some of the MRIs and that kind of stuff.
Oh, absolutely.
You put the guys through medical.
Well, I think that's one opportunity, Kevin. Like, you also know teams that are looking at it from bargain basement shopping, right? You take somebody who might have a little bit of a ding because they've been beat up. That might be the best value you can get. I can sign them for this.
No question.
I have decreased risk. I have an unbelievable support staff or assets outside my organization. Take that card to a quick little resto, and I got myself a bargain player, and that's how organizations have also been built, by restoring some of these things that were missed by other people. So you can look at it as it's a risk management, but it can also be an opportunity for value.
He hit it right on the head. It's all about how you look at your risk. And there's all kinds of risk. You can take injury risk, you can take character risk, you can take talent risk. There's all kinds of risk. It's just how deep and how long on that risk curve you want to go.
Mike, you mentioned the need or suggested the need for a more global look at this, so that, you know, in the industrial world, if I'm a worker, I can't negotiate, I can't ask for more pay by having my union negotiate a 100-hour work week or unsafe working conditions, right? And you know, OSHA doesn't go to NFL training camps. I mean, it's been threatened, but there is no global thing regulating a lot of sports outside of what happens in the CBA, which gives a lot of power to the unions across all sports, as well as management. Do you think that the changes that the leagues and unions have agreed to, like limiting contact, are in danger of causing fans to turn away from sports? Do you think if leagues and unions try to promote health, that risks turning off fans?
No, unless the rules were so dramatic that the game was radically changed. I think both the players and the owners have a clear financial interest in preserving the games and preserving that the games are popularized and that TV contracts are high to watch them. But I think it's interesting when we're looking at the role of the union, because, you know, Kevin mentioned it's the best information to get is for the players not yet in the league. There's a reason for that. It's that people not yet in the league have the least suasion on the bargaining process, and they're going to be most likely to be vulnerable to having to take the most invasive tests. That's why there's an age limit, right? Is because players not yet in the league can't collectively bargain on behalf of themselves because they're not yet in the league, right? So it's this situation of those who have the least leverage are the most likely going to have to divulge information.
The data, they weren't a 10 out of 10, they were like a 7 or 8. So athletes are the same way. You're going to trick yourself into thinking you're ready to go, you've done everything possible, but in reality, if you have a number in front of you that says actually you're not 100%, that could change the way the athlete, how many hours of sleep they get.
Something you work with?
Yeah, it's something that we actually have looked at in different pieces that we've done. We've come across a couple things. One, 60 Minutes did an awesome piece on, there was a study that was done on 2 groups of mice, one that was denied food and one that was denied sleep, and they both died at the same time. It was an awesome study that was like, sleep is really important. It just as a society, and just in even in trying to address the sleep issue, there's this crazy, and especially in America, there's just crazy, we just don't value sleep. I mean, we make our doctors work insane hours. They're like, oh, you got to work a 24-hour shift or whatever. And there just seems to be like this bravado of, I don't need sleep. We just don't value it the right way. And that really, if there's any analytic that needs to change, sleep studies need to change because it is so important.
And that's one thing, Peter, that sleep is the magic pill. But again, you can tell an athlete, Mike, sleep's really important. Yeah, got it, coach, right? I'm in, right? Because it's Tony Dungy said nothing good happens after midnight, right?
Right.
And some of those guys may debate it. Kevin, if you could maybe enlighten us on what they do after midnight.
I have no idea.
Okay.
But Angela said they're playing video games.
Yeah, well,
right?
okay.
I mean, you think Kevin was up playing video games after midnight?
Well, the player management, it might be a little different. But like what we literally did to have the conversation is we roll around the facility. Some people talk about bench and movement screen scores and speed, right? We talk about our ZQ score. So we reached out to like Zio, and there's a lot of different sleep monitoring type things. But we got 100 Zios across our facilities. We check them out to athletes. We compete. I mean, it's all on, right? So if Angela knows that all of a sudden it's a competition, I have a physical device that shows me the quality of my sleep, shows me where I'm light and deep sleep, and I work my way through that, and all of a sudden I start getting into my rituals and my sleep hygiene so that we don't hijack the sleep or pollute it. All of a sudden our athletes get a big anabolic, right, type advantage or a performance-enhancing advantage just out of sleep. But they can actually monitor it. We can compete to it. It becomes part of our culture. It's fun. We laugh about it. We joke. But yeah, they're rocking around like I was a 104 last night. I'm like, oh, great. I just got my ass kicked. I was 70, right? So you're just kind of like, all right, tonight I've got to come back and get them. But you have to make it applicable. Sleep's a magic pill, but we have to take the research and make it to where it's part of the athlete culture.
And also, right, it seems like making it competitive is something that helps.
Always.
So when we see the sports science episode that's devoted to sleep,
it's
there's going to be people lying around sleeping. It came from this panel, so you should all tune in. Let me wrap up by going back to the question of the ethics of some of this stuff. We talked about what's legal and not legal. We talked about things that seem natural, whatever that means, coming from your body or from outside your body. Things that are performance enhancing as opposed to therapeutic, like getting you back to where you were or boosting that. I just want to ask you guys, if for any of you guys, if you've encountered that line where you had a chance to cross a line which would have made you feel uncomfortable, whatever that is, illegal, ethical, natural, organic, whatever the line is, and where that line is for you, where you said, either in working with a client or yourself as an athlete or acquiring a player, where you said, no, I won't do this, and where you realized that was a line you wouldn't cross. What is it for you?
Well, I think it has to go in the hierarchy of one, is it illegal? Right? 2, is it within a federation or a governing body or a league standpoint of illegal? And then the next part gets down into, truly is this the right conversation we're having with an athlete, or whether it's a product or anything that is the cure-all is already thrown out for us. And then after that, is it, will it make, if I were to prioritize the different items that would upgrade an athlete's performance, where does it rank in that priority? And then if it ranks at number 1 for sure for that particular athlete, then you have to come back down, do your New York Times, cover. Does that still make sense? Would it hold true with everyone else and within our industry? And then from that, how are we going to go about it? But that's a lot of things to try to make it through. So normally it gets filtered out.
So just as a practical matter, with the guys you work with, you tend to be focused on other stuff that they haven't even thought about.
Well, it's all about this. If you want to talk analytics, it's like, okay, show me how well you're working this system that is guaranteed known truths, And if you're telling me that you're working that system like your on-field stats and it's at like running at 98% efficiency and it's still not what we need and I need to look at, whatever upgrade, then we're going to have the conversation. If you're rolling a 62 on your ZQ, you missed 3 out of the 6 meals you're supposed to have that day, you didn't get your, whatever you're training in, you missed your therapy session, then you know what, you're wasting.
Eat right, sleep right, then come back and talk to me about the stem cells?
Which comes back to the behavioral part of it, right? Now, injury is completely different. Goes back to what's happening globally and whatever else. Those are then various tools that we have to do. But athletes need to have the anchors of rituals. Right. Even if they get the stem cells, there's still a whole process they have to go through. Continuing to fill gaps with shortcuts, well, it's just a matter of time anyway.
You want to?
Oh yeah, I mean, this is where analytics are terrific for so many things. But when you're bringing up ethics, maybe analytics, which focuses on maximizing efficiencies and things of the like, where you do need to have a subjective quality to them to ensure that there's an ethical component to some of the proposed recommendations as to how to do things. And I think with issues like drug testing, with issues like surgeries that are performance enhancers, there's definitely an opportunity for philosophical or subjective thinking to go along with some of the analytical approaches that we've talked about.
One thing to provide comfort for a lot of young athletes, when they're like, oh, what do people do or whatever, I like to tell them, here's a great secret that I'm telling you is absolutely true. Lucky socks work. If you think it works, it works.
Robert Griffin right now is out training with us, a Heisman Trophy winner. Yep. That dude has the sexiest collection of socks.
I know.
Seriously, he wears different colors every day, stuff I've never seen. I don't know where it's pulling your eyes.
Exactly.
That's what it comes down to.
Yeah. Well, I'll remember that next year with my socks. These are just plain black socks.
They're just plain black socks.
Yeah, they're
socks. Yeah, boring.
We'll make these the lucky ones then. Yeah. Angela, what about you? Is there a difference for you between building your body back to where it was before it was injured and enhancing it beyond that, or what do you think of as what are you comfortable with you having done and what athletes doing?
I mean, the biggest flaw I see right now in the system for, say, a clean athlete is you're unsure what's out there. You're unsure what's going to test positive and what isn't going to test positive. I mean, there are cases where athletes test positive when something is in, they go to GNC and pick up a product and there's something, I mean, there's a high percentage of unlisted ingredients in products you pick up. So in our case, I was used to taking, a protein shake, I was taking multivitamins, fish oil, I had my legal substances that I was taking, and the Olympics roll around and I stopped taking everything, cold turkey, our whole team did, because we were so worried that something in one of those products would be tainted and therefore, you would test positive. So for the clean athletes out there, the athletes that want to stay clean, but also want to take advantage of every possible product or performance enhancer that's legal, that's the biggest problem, is you don't know what to trust. You're relying on the person next to you or your coach, your trainer, your friend, your teammate, but in the end, it's the product and is what's on it listed. So from that perspective, that's, illegal drugs, I mean, on the women's side, I don't think is as prevalent. It's still there, but it's not as prevalent. But absolutely, we want every advantage possible.
And I think that's where we have to better support the athletes. We have to hold the leagues and the teams also to better support the athletes to create a safe haven for them to have the right type of ethical recovery products that they know is, hey, listen, I can live in this little world. It's not cutting edge, but I can live in it, and it gives me 90-some% of what I need. And the teams and the leagues, just like we created with the NSF, Banned Substance Free and Accuracy and Labeling type program, that was at least a safe haven that athletes could trust to at least meet their basic requirements.
And that, actually, real quick, that we're going back to that, and that's one thing the entourage, I know you like that word, the Entourage Commission is talking, is we want to start holding trainers and coaches and doctors accountable. Now, how that is actually going to be enacted is a whole different story, but that's what they're looking at now. If someone is giving the athlete a pill and saying, here, this is going to help you, take it, and the athlete has no decision-making authority there, trying to hold those people accountable is kind of the next.
Well, one thing I'd just like everyone to think about in ending is that I don't know if this could ever happen, but it would be a really great idea, I think, to give athletes as much of a safe haven and amnesty as possible for athletes who are willing to describe their clinical history to get more data. When we're talking about all this stuff, without knowing what a lot of things that athletes take, how they specifically affect performance. And there's no way to run controlled experiments by giving human subjects, these drugs. It would be great to know what everybody has done in the past just to get the information. I don't know if if that could ever happen.
That's in utopia.
Yeah, but more data is better, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming, and thank you all for coming.